Well, morning and welcome to Elevenses with Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. I'll be taking you through the next 25-30 minutes or so with the show, which gives you some topical news, some potentially controversial views, and some better biking tips too. So what have we got for you today? We've got a fairly packed show again, actually. 1 year in from COVID, 1 year of 11s. Hard to believe at the moment. Ducati sales are down 10% in a challenging year. Shipping containers, one reason MCN is forecasting rises in new bike prices. A young female bike blogger turns out to be a 50-year-old man. A biker is banned for pushing a bike whilst over the limit. Classic bikers are up in arms about a ban on LED headlight bulbs. And a new safety campaign that treads an old path. We'll have a bit of a look at that, and we'll finish off by looking at a real fatal crash, sadly, on a left-hand bend, the killer cornering crash. So settle yourself down for the next, as I say, 25-30 minutes. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop me a line via the comment stream, and I will do my best to get back to you. We have Christine, Martin, and Clive all saying good morning. Martin saying good morning from Vietnam, or rather good evening, Vietnam. Hello. Good to see somebody from over the other side of the world, literally. Right, okay, so on with the show. Last February, mid-February, I was spending a couple of weeks in LA, actually, and in Northern California, splitting some time with my brother and my partner's relatives, and who had announced that there was a global health emergency, and obviously there were concerns about COVID, but they were really all about China at the time we flew out. And although cases have been found in a number of countries at that point, the case numbers were still in the tens, and we flew out, in a packed plane. Whilst we were there, of course, second 2 weeks in February, things started to take on a rather different perspective. The stories grew steadily more alarming. More cases appeared in dozens of countries, with numbers rising to hundreds in some. Cruise ships, that was one of the sort of standout memories, people being trapped on cruise ships with the virus running amok. And Italy was also rapidly becoming a hotspot. Nevertheless, we weren't too concerned, but we did fly back on a plane that was noticeably only 2/3 full. When we got back, there were still only a dozen cases in the UK. And from there, of course, things developed very, very quickly indeed. I opened up for training at the beginning of March. By March the 16th, the PM was asking for everybody to limit travel as much as possible and to cut down on non-essential contact. And the hand washing idea came in. And I was curtailing the first courses of the year. I'd actually cancelled them. And of course, March 23rd, literally almost a year from today, we went into what was to become lockdown 1.0, and that was to last all the way into mid-June. And I'm sure you remember the rest all too clearly. Did I expect still to be locked down a year later? Well, it's kind of hard to answer that, really, because I have a science background, master's degree. I'm no statistician. I'll be the first to say that 2 and 2 sometimes makes 5 when I do maths. But I do have a reasonable understanding of how things like exponential curves work. And it was very easy to see just how rapidly the disease was growing and spreading across the world. And it was also easy to see over the course of last year, particularly, how the rise and fall in case numbers in the UK was being affected by the various opening and closing measures. Will we still be in and out of lockdown this time next year? I can't answer that easily. The virus itself has mutated. So we have some slightly different factors to put into the numbers there. But of course, the really unpredictable element is government policy. That has been almost impossible to predict, quite frankly. So all I can do is do what I did last summer when I was able to work, which is take some COVID safety measures, which you probably know about if you're regular here. Cutting down the on-road contact by moving all the theory and debriefing sessions on to the internet via Zoom, most of them. So I'm pretty sure that in a year's time, I'm probably still going to be doing the same kind of thing. Okay, that's a little bit about the future 1 year in. It's a lovely sunny day here, of course, in London at the moment, and you probably remember that the weather last year bucked up dramatically almost as soon as we got locked down, which was at least a bonus. So let's cross fingers for the same kind of beautiful spring this year when we actually get back out on the road in just over a week's time. So, how's COVID affected the fortunes of motorcycle manufacturers? Well, Ducati have released their results, and like most of the others, they've also taken a hit. Last show, I did mention that there is a bit of an exception to this rule, and that some of the small, no-name Chinese manufacturers who've taken the opportunity to break open the electric scooter and commuter bike market have actually done pretty well, and they are now threatening to undercut conventional petrol bike manufacturers in their volume sales markets. Italy, of course, was particularly badly affected early on in the pandemic, and Ducati themselves suffered a 7-week halt in production right at the beginning of the biking season, and the result on their year's production was a reduction by 9.7%. So what they actually delivered was just over 48,000 motorcycles instead of 53,000 plus in 2019. Now, Ducati are putting a positive spin on the numbers, and they believe that they will be in a better position in 2021 to recover than they actually had planned for. And Claudio Domenicali, who's the CEO of Ducati, he said 2020 was indeed a challenging year, but we are satisfied with our financial performance throughout. Thanks to rigorous discipline, we were able to reduce fixed costs, thus limiting operating margin drop. At the same time, vastly reducing inventories had positive effects on cash flow, which is the best ever recorded to date. Investments in new products were fully untouched. This paved the way for the positive development of Ducati in the future. Now, you notice that line about reducing inventory. We'll come on to another story in a moment, which might impact that. But one factor in their reasonable performance is the fact that they have actually pushed up their turnover per bike. Basically, the cost per motorcycle now is €14,833, and that's gone up in 1 year from €13,500. So that's an increase of around 10% in the base price of a Ducati motorcycle. And that, to quote the company, reflects the strategy of evolving the product range towards the highest and premium part of the market. Now, as I've mentioned on several occasions over the last few months, whether that proves sustainable in a rapidly changing world, I don't know. I'll leave you to ponder that one for yourselves. Right, okay, Tony has just looked in. Good morning, Tony. Good to see you too. So, all right, moving on from Ducati's issues, why might bike prices be rising across the world? Well, MCN ran a story about the problem of potentially ballooning costs, and they're suggesting that whilst 2021 machines are unlikely to be affected, there could be a big jump in 2022. But having said that, Royal Enfield have already hiked their prices in the home market last year, and they're looking to increase their prices again and they say this is because raw material costs have gone up faster than our ability to hike prices. What are the problems? Well, as just mentioned, raw material costs an issue. MCN actually quoted aluminium as going up from just over £1,000 a tonne to £1,400 a tonne. Iron ore's doubled. Rubber prices up over 100%. And they say it's all due to high demand for the materials, particularly in China, allied by reductions in supply due to the pandemic. They also point out that there's evidence that a spike in consumer demand, particularly for laptops for home work, working, new phones, TVs and games consoles for increased sort of leisure time at home, has created a shortage of semiconductors, and Honda, Yamaha and Suzuki have all pointed this up to be a problem in their procurement of electronic parts. But it turns out the significant issue is actually rather more simple. It's a shortage of shipping containers that actually get the components to the factories and, of course, move the completed bikes to the markets where they're needed. And that shortage is leading to rising costs. Now, let me show you a picture here. Whoops, that's the wrong one. Let me get that one in. There we go. That gives you an idea of how the shipping costs of containers has risen. And you'll notice there's two lines on the graph, and I'll explain that in just a moment. Now, like me, you're probably wondering how it is that shipping container costs could have gone through the roof like this. After all, it's not like we're buying lots more stuff, is it? Things are being home delivered, but much of this is what we would have bought anyway from a shop. So it doesn't really affect the sort of cross-Atlantic or cross-Pacific supply chains, or at least I wouldn't have thought it would. These goods still need to be shipped from the country of manufacture to the UK. So why are container costs rising? Well, I thought I'd look into the problems and find out, basically. And the answer lies in where the containers actually are. They're in the wrong place, basically. By the middle of last year, containers were moving from the USA to the USA from Asia, but due to the COVID-19 restrictions, almost nothing moved in the other direction. So basically, goods were going towards the States, but those containers which would have taken US-made products back weren't going anywhere. And containers have been stuck in US ports and stayed there for months. The ports became congested because they suffered from problems with labour force reductions due to illness. There were also border restrictions, which meant the work of customs was partly suspended. So some items simply couldn't be moved off the quayside into the supply chain further down the line. Basically, although China got its exports up and running earlier than the rest of the world got back together after COVID last year, it seems that only 4 containers were sent back out of every 10 arriving in ports. 6 ended up basically stuck in ports. And the shipping companies weren't interested in returning empty containers either. So that led to a number of the vessels which would normally be plying the seas actually going off and being put in cold storage. So the thing is that trade between China and the US in particular is so huge that it's actually millions of containers that are stuck. Now, some countries have been making very positive efforts to move empty containers back to where they're needed. Government-owned Indian Railways, for example, has been moving empty boxes from inland depots to seaports for free. South Korea's got 9 extra vessels running on their Trans-Pacific route to help local manufacturers move goods. China's state-owned shipyard has converted at least one freshly built paper and pulp carrier to transport containers instead. And you may also be thinking, why can't you just build new containers? Well, you can, but of course that requires steel, and that's gone up, as we know. So the Chinese container manufacturers who dominate the market are now charging around $2,500 for a container, which is up from about $1,600 last year. So is that the reason we could be seeing rising bike prices? Well, this is where it gets interesting, because an industry analyst whose article I read said that the business areas that are affected by the container problem have been affected in different ways. For example, Asia's textile industry, which operates on small margins and often with small businesses, has been particularly badly hit by the increase in shipping costs. And many smaller mills have gone out of business, whilst the larger ones are renegotiating their costs. But interestingly, the authors say that the transportation of high-value goods like mechanical engineering products, electronics, and computer equipment has been minimally affected, presumably because the bulk cost of what's in the container is much higher than the shipping cost, if you see what I mean. So if something which is a low value, the shipping container and transport costs are a significant chunk of what the overall bill of getting your goods from A to B. What's a high value product? Well, a motorcycle would be, wouldn't it? So whilst shipping costs undoubtedly have increased, it may not be the full explanation for upcoming price rises. Frankly, a shortage of anything is always a good excuse for a bike price hike. Nevertheless, as the industry analyst said, it's a real black swan event. Cheryl's looked in as well. Good morning, Cheryl. Right, I'll bring you up to date with one of the more bizarre stories from the internet so far this year, where a young female bike blogger from Japan with a huge social media following has been unmasked as a 50-year-old male posing with her Yamaha bike. Azusaga Kuyuyaki has been writing about her love of playing around with bikes, but it turns out the man behind the Twitter account with more than 17,000 followers has been using video apps and Photoshop to alter his appearance. Of course, once the deception was revealed, many people are now spotting the clues. One Twitter user wrote, "People fell for that. The face looks fake, and damn, that hairy arm." If you really want to see what all the fuss is about, you can go over to the Twitter account, which I am just posting in the comment stream now. Okay, so don't forget you're watching Kevin Williams here with a episode of Elevenses. You can set yourself a reminder. Elevenses goes out on Sundays and Wednesdays at 11. If you can't get it live here, you can always catch up on Facebook, but you can also find all the shows over on my YouTube channel, which is Survival Skills UK. Don't forget that all important UK on the end, or you will end up watching somebody showing you how to cook a wonderful stew out of dried fish or something very similar. Right, so, okay, being in charge of a motor vehicle whilst under the influence is never a good idea, even if you have no intention of going anywhere on it. Unfortunately, a motorcyclist from Hebburn in Tyneside appears to have fallen foul of the rules when he was paddling his bike down the road just 100 meters. Basically, what seems to have happened is he had an argument with his girlfriend's father. The girlfriend told him to pack his stuff up and leave, or she would call the police. So he seems to have gone and moved his bike, even though he was a bit worse aware for alcohol. And even though his destination was just 100 meters away, it seems a witness had already called the police about the altercation. Basically, they found Jamie Lewis, 24 years old, sitting aside his Lex moto machine halfway between the two places. Prosecutor said police attended and found the defendant sat astride a motorbike with the keys in ignition. His eyes were glazed and he was unsteady on his feet. He replied to them, "I wasn't even driving." Unfortunately for him, he then blew more than twice the legal limit for alcohol, and his defence that the keys were his house keys appears to have cut no ice with magistrates, and he was banned from driving for 6 months and hit with fines and costs of no less than £449. Okay, so sanitary tale there. Don't go anywhere near a motor vehicle of any sort if you're worse for wear. Right, do a quick Google and you'll find a result saying something like this. LED headlight bulbs. Upgrade your H4 halogens to a brighter, whiter, faster acting LED bulb. We have both Philips and the 2020 brands available for creating the perfect LED beam. So reading that, it sounds easy enough. Buy the bulb, fit it, and Bob's your uncle, except for one thing, it's illegal. To be fair to that website, if you do a search for "are LED bulbs legal?" You'll find that they say no. But this advertising basically is selling these bulbs. It's a UK website, and it's making out it's an easy upgrade. And it's at the bottom of a shock, horror, outrage series of posts which have been doing the rounds on classic bike forums this week. One forum had this post which said, "MOT outlaws LED bulbs on historic vehicles," and went on to claim that new rules from Britain's vehicle testing agency will now fail any classic machine that's been fitted with LED headlights. Right, two comments on that. First, it's not a new rule. It's been the law for quite some time, and that's exactly what a rather fed-up sounding MOT tester said when he told the people reading this and protesting about it that anyone who'd listened, basically, he quoted from the MOT testing manual, which says existing halogen headlight units should not be converted to be used with HID or LED bulbs. If such a conversion has been done, you must fail the headlamp. Secondly, it's not just classic vehicles, it's any vehicle that wasn't originally fitted with an LED headlight. The exception is unless the entire headlight is replaced. Now, of course, some riders have been simply doing the whacking the LED bulb, which they bought from websites like the one I've just mentioned. And some have got away with it. Some, taken them in for test, and they've not actually had any quibbles about it. But they are illegal. And why is it? Well, it's because basically the LED bulbs that are on the market, many of them don't match the precise design of those standard incandescent bulbs. And basically what the problem is that the filament of a standard incandescent bulb is placed very, very precisely to match the reflector of your headlight so that you get a good beam pattern. The LEDs are very often scattered the entire length of what would have been the sort of glass bulb area, and so they simply don't put the light out in the right places to be reflected into a good beam pattern. You very often end up either dazzling oncoming drivers or riding behind something which is diffuse and actually worse than the original headlight. Now, my brother is out in the US, as I mentioned earlier. Rules are rather more lax out there, and trying to upgrade his WR250 headlight, which is a bit of a glowworm. He has tried quite a few different LED bulbs before he came across one that A, was actually brighter, a lot of them aren't, and B, that actually gave him a decent beam pattern from the reflector without dazzling oncoming drivers. So think about that. If you have gone for an LED upgrade, be aware you will likely fail the MOT if the MOT rules, well, you will fail the MOT if the MOT rules are being applied correctly. Right, okay. Kevin has looked in as well. Morning to you, Kevin. Right, okay, so on to the final bit today. Slightly, I'm always in two minds about running stories like this, but in my focus on Friday piece, I looked at the new Know the Dangers social media campaign from the East Midlands based Shiny Side Up partnership, not to be confused with Shiny Side Up in New Zealand. Now, this group of, as the site says, dedicated professionals from road safety, collision investigation, police officer, police traffic management teams have launched their series of CGI videos with the aim of highlighting the most common causes of collisions for motorcyclists. Why? Well, as usual, the focus of the campaign is to reduce the number of fatal and serious casualties suffered by bikers across Derbyshire, Leicestershire and Nottinghamshire, whether they are riding for leisure or for commuting. Now, I won't rehash what I said on Friday, so you might have read it. If you haven't, you can obviously backtrack a day on Facebook and go and read it. But what I will do is I will have a quick look at the final video that is in this pack of, let me just get the video up. Okay, so there is the message from Shiny Side Up. Tell me precisely how that prevents a rider having that crash. The brake on the straight advice is sound enough in itself, but it's still lacking any meaningful detail on how to avoid this kind of crash. Now, as I say, I'm always a bit dubious about whether I should bring in things like this, but yet another fatal crash inquest result appeared in my newsfeed just a day or two ago. The headline said, "Teacher killed in motorcycle crash in Toft, may have misjudged bend in road, inquest hears." And to sum up what happened, a rider was basically involved in a collision on the B6121 between Toft and Bourne, and the theory is that he somehow misjudged the angle of the bend. The inquest into Michael Makin's death could not pinpoint why he actually lost control of his Honda VFR 750, though I will point up that it is a VFR 750. The rider was 59. He slid with his bike into the opposite carriageway, so just as you've seen in that video there, and collided with the front of a Ford Transit van being driven by Darren Lawson from Bourne. Now, Assistant Coroner Marianne Johnson said there was no evidence to suggest that Mr. Lawson was any way responsible for the collision. So we have to assume, therefore, that the rider error was the cause of the crash. Mr. Lawson said that he was on a stretch of road on a downhill slope heading towards a right-hand bend. He saw a motorbike travelling around the bend towards him. He says, "I remember seeing the motorcycle leaning over as bikers do on a bend, but it was riding very normally. The next thing I remember is a loud bang and we collided on the bend." Mr. Lawson said that he knew the road well, was in third gear doing about 50 miles per hour. He also added that the accident happened quickly and he had no idea why the rider had lost control. Now, the inquest was told there were chevron boards, the black and white arrows, reduced speed now signs, slow written on the road on the approach to the bend from both directions, and neither vehicle had any defects which would have contributed to the collision. Although I will point out that VFR 750 may not have had ABS, and that would impact on what you're going to hear. So sadly, Mr. Makin, who'd been on the way to meet up with biking friends in Peterborough, died at the scene from injuries. The collision investigator said there was a tyre mark which showed Mr. Makin had braked hard as he exited the bend. He said it was possible the rider had entered the bend at a speed he was not comfortable with. The investigator also suggested target fixation as a possible cause. So what are the thoughts running through my head as I read that in context with that video? Does the video do what it says on the tin, which is help the rider know the danger? Well, it might flag up the fact that bends are dangerous and that riders fall off on them, but does it really offer us any serious advice about how not to have that crash? Well, the answer, of course, is not really. Brake on the straight. Okay, fair enough, as far as it goes. But how do you know that your speed is right? Well, the clues there in the inquest are the slow on the road, the bend warning signs, the chevrons, reduced speed now sign. They're all there to help people get their speed judged more accurately for the corner. But clearly, if we don't take that advice on board, we won't get our speed right. And even when we do, it's not always easy to spot just how slow a corner is. What else might have gone wrong? Well, it's hard to say really from the inquest, the target fixation. Well, I don't know. Was the rider running wide? Did he then look at the van and think, I'm going to run into that and hit the brakes hard? We'll never know. But the loss of control, which the skid mark implies, is fairly obvious. The problem that I have, and others too, with these kind of campaigns is that they imply that if you do the right thing, nothing will go wrong. But as I keep saying, sadly, the evidence is that that is actually not a very successful strategy, and that it's not just unskilled or reckless riders that have these crashes. Yes, they may be more at risk than an ordinary rider, as it were, but the stats are made up of mostly of riders who are doing all the right things in all the right places, except on this one corner. We look at these accident stats and we find that in most cases, the rider involved was the kind of rider that all their friends will say, well, we never thought he or she would have that kind of crash because they didn't do things that were out of the ordinary. So, you know, the survival skills approach is to try to come at riding errors from the opposite end. Rather than trying to say what you should do, let's try to understand why somebody might make an error like this one, braking too late in a corner, braking lent over. What might throw them off? Is it going to be misjudgment of speed? Is it going to be an inability or a lack of practice at braking on the straight? You know, many riders still believe that a good rider is one who just rolls off the throttle and rolls on the throttle. A good rider is one that uses whatever is necessary at each and individual location. So we need to practice braking on straights. We need to practice braking full stop. We need to know how hard we can brake. We need to know that you can brake hard enough on a decent surface that will loft the rear wheel on a bike like the VFR, those twin discs up front, even though it's a heavy-ish bike, it will lift the rear wheel long before the front skids, unless you hammer the brake on very hard, very suddenly. And we have to try to overcome this idea that that there are skilled riders don't crash, because they do, I'm afraid. We need to understand these common crashes, and that's the survival skills approach, basically. Right, again, I'm wittering on here. Couple of final things to round off with. Shiny Side Up New Zealand is doing an online event Sunday next. Now, that'll be a 12-hour time difference, of course, so their 10 a.m. till 4 p.m. will actually equate to 10 p.m. UK to 4 a.m. UK time. I'm not sure whether or not the events will be just live streamed or whether they will be recorded and put up at some other point, but it will be worth looking at. I also delivered the Science of Being Seen presentation in a rapid fire 20-minute talk on the Road Safety GB Powered Two-Wheeler webinar on Friday. So I forgot to mention that on Wednesday, of course. So if you go on to the Road Safety GB site and look for their Powered Two-Wheeler event, you'll find the Science of Being Seen talk is up online. And that pretty much brings me to the end of today's show. Don't forget, of course, that we are doing the Friday webinar. Last one on Friday, we'll look at some mental tricks that you can do to try and get yourself ready to ride, because we'll likely be heading out on the Monday and the following weekend, which is Easter, of course, and it'd be a good idea to be prepared for that. It would also be a good time to head over to my Survival Skills UK channel on YouTube and check out the 60-second safety videos. There are more and more of those going up all the time, and they all cover the kind of highly practical advice which is missing, sadly, from those Shiny Side Up videos that I just showed you. You can also, of course, tune in to my Tips on Tuesday and Skills on Saturday posts, which are now indexed over on Coffee as well. And you can find the address for those in the header to this show. And last but not least, don't forget, I am now taking bookings for on-road training again. We will be back out on the road on Monday in just over a week's time. And I do have bookings already in the diary. So if you want to get on a course with me around the London area, I will be back in the saddle in just a few days' time. So, right, that's it for today. Thank you very much indeed for tuning in, and I hope we'll see you again for the next show on Wednesday. And if we don't see you on Wednesday, maybe on Friday for the webinar, or if we don't see you then, a week's time on the next Elevenses, just before we go back to riding. Thanks again. Ride safe out there.